Welcome to Ece Gurler Art. Normally, I would draw this kind of portrait in maybe 4 or 5 hours. But with the technique I'm going to show you today, I will tell you this. I drew this in only 2.5 hours. But how? I'm gonna show you all the techniques that I have by using only one charcoal pencil, medium charcoal pencil, and soft charcoal stick. Oh, and most importantly, a watercolor brush. How did I use watercolor brush in my charcoal drawing? I will show you in a minute. If you want to check out my real-time tutorials, they are all on my Patreon, patreon.com/EceGurler. I had talked about some charcoal techniques before. If you haven't watched it yet, I'm just putting it right here so you can learn more about charcoal pencils. If you are ready, let's get our hands dirty. When it comes to charcoal drawing, the biggest challenge is usually creating the different shades because we don't have the degree of the pencils like we do in graphite pencils. So how do we do that? I'm going to show you different techniques for this. The first one is to have your charcoal stick. You can have an X-Acto knife and create all the charcoal dust first and dip your watercolor brush and basically add all the shadows. After you add the shadows, and you can just continue blending them around, and you will get a very base tone as well. Just like maybe 2H or HB, and the shadows will be around 2B to 6B even. So if you want to get the darkest result, I highly recommend you to tap on your paper with your brush loaded with powder just in a vertical direction. As you can see, it gets much darker when you do that. In order to give them a natural look, I usually go over them with my clean napkin at least once without adding any pressure. So another challenge of charcoal artists is just softening the lines. In order to soften all these lines to make them look realistic, you can use blending stump. Blending stump will make those lines softer and then will create some tonal differences. And the best part is it's going to keep your shades even dark, because when you use the Q-tips or when you use a tissue, it's going to lighten up these dark shadows, but blending stump will keep them dark. Another thing is with the charcoal that's smudged on your blending stump, you can still keep drawing. Just like here, I'm shading the nose with that charcoal on my blending stump. And of course, we have to blend them in with our napkin or tissue so that they will look more natural. Another challenge is keeping the eyebrows realistic. How we do that? Again, in order to have them more realistic look, we should soften them. We can soften them with our blending stump or with just a touch of our watercolor brush. Here, I'm dipping my brush again to add all these different shadows around the face. She has a shadow on the left, whereas the right part is much lighter. And another way of adding these shadows besides the watercolor brush is your napkin. So if you have a dirty napkin just like this, you can dip it into your charcoal powder again and use that dirty tissue to add some shadows. Here, I'll show you how. I just dipped it, it looks dirty, and I'm just going to go in and now add the shadows gently. Don't put a lot of pressure in because we don't want to harm the paper. It looks great. And by using your clean tissue, just applying it everywhere, you can spread this charcoal dust in the tooth of the paper and get a very nice basic tone. Now we talked about how to soften the lines by using blending stump. Now let's talk about the tooth and the mouth. Well, we are not supposed to make the tooth in the, with charcoal pencil lines because they look like rotten or it just like doesn't look natural. So the mouth has the cavity, and the mouth cavity is just definitely going to be dark, so black. But in order to do the teeth, we are just going to create first a very light gray layer with our brush, and we are going to go in with our kneaded eraser to create those whites. So the separation of those teeth going to be basically just light gray. Of course, the gum needs to be darker than the teeth, so what you have to do is just go in there with your pencil, but shade very, very lightly and blend them with a Q-tip. For the lips, I dipped my watercolor brush again into charcoal powder. I made sure that I didn't get too much of them on my brush, and I'm gently applying it. You can see that it has a very nice base tone right now. So this basic shade is great, but I have to add shadows on it, and I have to add highlights. For the shadows, I'm just going to apply my medium charcoal pencil just a little bit, and I'm going to blend it with a Q-tip first. Then I'm going to go in with my watercolor brush again, and remember the first technique I showed you, you're just going to apply that charcoal dust with perpendicular strokes to my paper. Once that's done, you can see I just realized that there are some lines on the lower lip, so I added that with the charcoal that was smudged on my blending stump. So I made them with blending stump, added some highlight with my kneaded eraser, and then I blend them all just a little bit with my tissue. I continue to give the shadows on the face. Then I realized that I need to add some highlights. How do I do that? You should always use the clean part of your kneaded eraser. So I highly recommend you to do this so that you end up with the clean side of your kneaded eraser, especially when you're working with charcoal, and just highlight right after that. And after each highlight, we need to remember to blend them with a tissue again so that they transition more naturally. And when it comes to the eraser pencils, where do we use them besides hair is, for example, for details like this. There are some linear details right under the eye. You can see there are some lines, eye lines, and we can give them with our eraser pencil. Well, let's talk about hair. So that was a very a long dark line where the hair roots are. So I added that with my soft charcoal block, and I blended that with a blending stump because I want it to really look dark. After that, I did the outline of the hair, and she's blonde. So how are we gonna do blonde hair with our pitch black charcoal? If you ask, let me show you. After I created the outline, I go ahead again, I create my charcoal dust with my X-Acto knife and my charcoal block. But before I explain to that, I just have to show you how to clean your hands. This is my wet towels. It is really important to clean your hands often when you're dealing with charcoal because you don't want to mess your drawing up. Seriously. Then let's go to the base layer of the hair. I dipped my watercolor brush into the charcoal powder and I just did the base layer of the hair. You can do another thing, right? Just like here, you can basically apply the powder on your drawing and then just go up and down movements with your brush to create a more like hair-like structure. But it's all up to you. It doesn't really matter because we're just gonna draw on them and erase them anyway. So the second part of this is just drawing on that base layer, and I have my medium charcoal pencil for that. You shouldn't do from up to down like continuous lines. That's not gonna look natural. So try to do some broken lines, especially from the top and end there will be lines, and in the middle probably there will be more highlights, etc. Here, after the lines, I'm just blending them again with my brush, and then I'm erasing so that I can give a more realistic look. This is just the first layer. We have to do more layers to get more realistic results. Maybe 2 or 3 layers more. We will just decide as we go. I'm adding more shadows, as you can see, and I'm going to add more powder now because I'm going to do the clothing part. The shadows here are very kind of vague and you cannot see exact lines where they start or end on the left. So I just added just what I saw. And this is a perfect way to create that effect. By using your brush, there will be a smoother transition. I'm trying to decide how to go with the background. Should I go like light gray or just dark pitch black? I guess I'm just gonna go with black in the end. And while I'm doing the background, I'm using my fingers. I don't use my fingers to blend usually, especially with graphite pencils, but with charcoal, I enjoy it a lot for some reason, so I'm just gonna do it. So what happens when you make a mistake? How do you erase it? These erasers are great. They are Staedtler Mars plastic that I use. They're just white erasers. Or electrical eraser is another option that you can use. They are really helpful as well. And for the little areas, I'm using this Tombow Mono pencil eraser, which works great on charcoal. As you can see, I'm giving now all the flying hair details with no problems at all. Adding more hair details and layers as I promised, and you can see there's more hair on the top coming out of like their short hair, short black hair. To give them a more natural look, you can always go over them with a tissue just a little bit, maybe once or twice without putting any pressure. Now I'm finishing up the clothing details with the help of my watercolor brush. I have to remind you though, this is not finished. We have to darken up the darkest parts, such as the eyebrows, such as the inside of the eye or the mouth or the nostrils, because then it's going to get a lot of depth. By the way, let me use my electrical eraser here and show you how it is easy to fix those kind of mistakes that you make with charcoal. Now it's time to go dark, and after I finish the jaw and the chin part, I'm just going to show you how I can add the eyebrow details. For eyebrows, you need to have a sharpened charcoal pencil, because otherwise it's not going to give a realistic effect. And of course, you have to follow the direction of the hair growth from the photo. Here I added them. It already looks beautiful, and to give them a more natural look, I'm going to touch up with my brush later. I added the dark details in the eye and the nose and the, where she smiles. You can see the gesture lines, and it's much darker there on the left. After adding all these darkest of the dark, I'm just going to go over them with slight pressure with my tissue. That's it. It looks much better now, don't you think? And don't forget the nostrils. As I said, once you make them really black, they're just gonna look much more realistic. And the mouth, I'm just going to go into the black of the mouth much more and going to make it much blacker and add as many shadows as possible, and it's going to be ready. And then for the eye part, always try to use and soften out the lines with your blending stump or Q-tip, guys, because they are much thinner and gentler when it comes to the eye area. I'm almost finished. As you can see, it looks pretty realistic to me for now. It's not bad at all, and it took me only 2.5 hours, guys. Usually it takes me around 4.5 or 5 hours with graphite pencils. And just using the brush technique, I shortened my time. I still enjoyed my drawing, so I highly recommend it. I hope you found this tutorial helpful. All my charcoal drawing tutorials are in my charcoal playlist. I'll see you there. Bye! Thanks for watching my video. If you like my videos, please don't forget to subscribe. And for my real-time narrated tutorials, visit my Patreon, patreon.com/Ece Gurler. Stay with art and love.